The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to today's webcast on upgrading, migrating, or potentially re-implementing and understanding your path to Dynamics 365. My name is Amir Kashniani. I'm going to be giving a brief intro to today's topics, and then I will be passing it over to Alex Quidney, who will be giving today's webcast and doing the heavy lifting. Before we get started, just want to go through a little bit about us, and prior to doing that, I want to also go over some housekeeping items. If you guys do have any questions during today's webcast or experience any kind of audio-visual difficulties, we have a side menu pane, and you can go ahead and log in within the question pane. Any of your questions or concerns, and we have a few moderators standing by who will be able to assist in real time, and then we'll get any webcast related questions answered at the tail end of this presentation. So to kick things off, just give a quick intro to who we are. Avantico was founded in 2006. We started as AX Mentor, and late last year in 2017, we officially rebranded to better align with Microsoft under the new name Avantico, which means moving forward. We have been a Microsoft certified partner ever since 2006. We are members of the TAP program. We have members that are board members as far as the AXUG, CRMUG, and 365UG go. We also have MVPs on board, such as Alex. Avantico is headquartered in sunny San Diego, California. We have offices spanning up the West Coast through Temecula, Irvine, Los Angeles. We also have a European presence, both in Copenhagen, Denmark, and London, UK. Our vertical expertise spans manufacturing and distribution primarily. We also have focus groups around professional and financial services, retail, e-commerce, and a public sector practice group. As far as our services go, we are a full-stop shop for 365, AX, and CRM, everything from road mapping and planning, topics that we'll be going through today, all the way through full implementations, and then post-live help desk and support services. As mentioned before, we do have a public sector practice group, so we are also certified around there. We also have some value-add products. The one that I'm going to really highlight today is going to be the QAX, the Address Verification Validation Solution. This tool is actually primarily used for a lot of scenarios that we will be covering today. If you're migrating or re-implementing or even upgrading from a legacy version to 365, this tool will cleanse your data as it goes into the new system, so you're up and running with the latest and greatest. And this solution was built in partnership with Experian. It's been doing very well, and we'll be happy to highlight some of the key feature functionality for you if you guys would like to see more. And we also have a webcast on this in the coming weeks that we will be able to provide information with. In addition to that, we have 2 mobile applications and a full mobile framework that they sit on. The AX Admin app remotely manages your AX environment. We also have a workflow app, timesheet, expenses, and any other workflows in AX could be remotely managed. And we also have a budgeting solution as part of our advanced public sector module. With that, Alex, I'll pass it over to you for today's webcast.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Quidney. I've been working with Dynamics AX for about around 10 years now, and I'm also Microsoft MVP. And I wanted to say, if you're looking at upgrading, you may not have a great grip on all things Dynamics 365 yet. So these next slides are going to provide some important context. So what's important about Dynamics 365 is understanding Microsoft's direction. So what is it? It's Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition. The name, it's a mouthful, I know, but it's a piece of software designed to run business on. And so given that it's a piece of software designed to run business on, and every business is unique, how can Microsoft accommodate our unique business needs with a single piece of software? So what they did was they partially open source the code base, and they allow customers to customize and fit it to their needs. And what this is called is overlaying the base code. So you have to ask yourself, how does Microsoft grow and scale this piece of software while still supporting customers with further diverging code bases from their original core product. So in AX 2009, AX 4.0, and previous versions, how did they grow the software while still supporting customers? What they did was they tried to isolate the code in layers. You would have your sys layer, your SIP layer, you had certain GLS layers, and then you'd end up with your customer layers, var, cus, and the user layer. So when you had service packs and hotfixes, what they would do is they'd create a SIP layer or patch layer. And so that would identify the changes from base. And so code would be merged and refactored as needed to fit this new code base. And as many of you probably know, it's often a long, inexpensive, and painful process. Service packs and hotfixes are applied infrequently due to the efforts and costs and testing, and it's considered generally a significant engagement. If you need a hotfix or if you need to do a service pack, you're looking at a good amount of effort to work often with your partner and a lot of testing with customers. So with 2012, so how does Microsoft grow and scale the software while still supporting their customers? We posed that same question. And what they introduced was models as isolation containers. This was a major improvement, but the granularity is not quite there. So your models would not contain only the deltas, but they would contain entire pieces. And so you need that granularity to really do what they're trying to do. It's also too easy to switch between models and make mistakes. So you might have some code that exists in multiple models at the same time by mistake. So their execution's not quite there. You could do things like circular model references, where you would have model A referencing B and B referencing A. And if you pulled out either model, it would not work. There's a non-rigid model object dependencies. You have lower objects could reference the higher objects in different models or different layers. And then also there's version control issues with multiple models due to granularity. There's various other quirks where you can pick up other objects in random models through little miscellaneous bugs, and where our service pack and hotfixes and upgrades are still extremely difficult. So it was a huge step forward in the progress, but it's still not quite there. So that brings us to Dynamics 365 for operations. So if we pose that same question, how do they grow and scale the software still supporting customers? What they introduced is what's called the extensibility concept. This extensibility concept allows underlying objects to be strategically changed and refactored without impacting your extensions. So that means your upgrades, changes, or hotfixes can be installed with low or no impact. And they also introduced increased object granularity. So only the changes that you create exists in the extended object. So if you add only a small button on a form and you look at the code of that button in your environment, it's only that button. And then they do rigid model dependency options. So now if you have a model that depends on other models, they enforce it. And then other things they're doing are they're sealing their certain parts of the code base for modifications to prevent users from modifying things that they're modifying. And eventually their goal is to have the entire core code base sealed, and you'll only be able to do things through extensions. And what that'll allow them to do is provide a software as a service. And then version control is utilized with better granularity. Because of the increased object granularity, version control is much more effective. And so you can identify your exact code changes that relate those specifically to work items to provide accurate change tracking. And a work item could be, say, a functional design document or some sort of abstract task that you can tangibly connect to your code changes. So with Dynamics 365, it's going to be as close to software as a service as possible. Their goal is to likely be the final version of AX. Other than potential name changes. So if you think about like an encyclopedia, they originally started with books, and then you eventually had CDs. Books were door to door, and then CDs, and then now it's on the web as Wikipedia. And Wikipedia on the web is generally the final medium as changes are done in place. And they still do things like improve their mobile app and all sorts of different things, but it exists in the same place. So Wikipedia is kind of its final form, and then AX, as many of us know, it is essentially a static state product. So users come in and it's the same every day. And so Microsoft wants to move the product towards something similar to Windows Update, where you'll get notified and hit next, and finish, and you'll have a newer version. So you'll potentially install hotfixes for problems that you don't even know you have yet, or even better, install new features like Cortana Intelligence Suite with things like machine learning. This would be on the monthly cycle as it's released instead of one or multi-year cycle that many users or partners experience due to the difficulty installing hotfixes and updates. And then as the technology progresses, specifically utilizing Service Fabric and related technologies with Azure, there will eventually be no virtual machines, and Microsoft will be providing a true software as a service application. That is their direction, but that's potentially not going to be seen in this, not for a few years. But right now there are virtual machines; those aren't going away yet. So I want to explain extensions and overlaying, the difference. So you can think of overlaying as if you were to write some code in a file, and then I go and write my code in that same file. Even if you track the code via notes or version control, when you completely rewrite your file or move things around, you have to be considerate of the code that I've written in your file. And so you can imagine if I were to write my code in thousands of your files across the system, that is often the core complexity of upgrades and hotfixes from a technical perspective. So generally, overlaying is considered bad and should be avoided. And with extensions, it allows you to be responsible for only your code and not the base code in addition. So extensions, if you look at the graph, they can be compiled into separate assemblies, while overlaying is one single assembly. So what this does is this make things like layers, even today, much less important. So it's a lot less significant where code exists in your environment in layers with the extension methodology and dependent models. And what this allows you to do is it has an improved application lifecycle management. So your extension models simplify and improve the performance of deployments, builds, test automation, and delivery to customers. You've got design time performance as well. You can build in your model or product, doesn't require you to recompile the entire application. And then servicing, so in the cloud, Microsoft can install, patch, upgrade, and change internal APIs without affecting your customizations. At some point, what they'd like to do is be able to upgrade or patch your environment as it exists in Azure without your attendance. So it'll just happen. And then upgrades, unlike overlaying, extensions reduce the cost of upgrading to a new version significantly, as it eliminates the costly code and metadata conflicts. So it can be like you have a team of Microsoft engineers working all the time to improve the product in your organization effectively. So I want to discuss some terms that I'll be using and what they mean. Upgrade, migrate, and reimplement. So upgrade, what this does is this brings your code and data forward where your code would need refactored, and potentially your data needs transformed a little. Migrate, what this does is it uses a Microsoft tool set that's imported into ATIX 2009 to massage data forward to 365. So your code and data structures need to be created in the target environment. And then reimplement or implement, what this is standing up a new Dynamics 365 environment, implementing using traditional methods such as exporting and importing of data from your legacy environments, whether it's 2009, AS400, or whatever environment, manually setting up configurations and testing. This is just a standard implementation. And then your code and data structures need to be created in your target environment. So I'm going to be discussing the 3 different paths today to upgrade to 365, 2012, 2009, and 4.0. They have some pretty significant differences. So first for 2012. So for 2012, you can see in these graphics, I want to start off with these wireframes. I made these, but they're made with common sense conclusions. Microsoft hasn't officially released any infographics yet, but these are the paths that they've released. So with 2012, and R3, you can have a direct upgrade to 365. In 2012, R2 is almost out of preview, and if you hunt around, you can actually find the preview files if you wanted to start early on R2. And then if you know the right people, you can also get in a lot of the preview programs. And then if you're on AX 2012 RTW, it's still on the roadmap and it should be not far behind last I checked. But for 2012, if you're on R2, R3, right now you have pretty much a direct upgrade path. And if you're on 2012 RTW, you'd have to re-implement or upgrade to R2 or upgrade to R3, or just wait until they extend the backwards compatibility. So I want to talk about why you'd want to use the different paths. So for re-implement for 2012, you may have many customizations that you don't want to bring forward. Or if you want a clean start for some reason, such as dramatically changing the way you do business in AX, maybe you're consolidating multiple isolated AX environments if you had standalone AOSs that were across the globe, or if you have unsupported ISV solutions or different code applications that won't work with the new version without completely redoing them, you may just consider re-implementing. The path 2 to upgrade, why may you want to do that? If you have low or medium customizations, if you have supported ISVs, maybe you need all of your data and all your historical data from all your tables, and if the path is not as difficult. So there are many factors to consider in making a decision to upgrade or reimplement. So don't take this as a comprehensive list, but more as thinking points for deciding. And so I kind of want to talk about a third option for 2012. It's like a hybrid approach. This isn't any official approach, but what you can do is you can use the tools provided from Microsoft to get the pieces that you want. So you can upgrade your code and then migrate your data, or you can upgrade your data, use their tool set, and then just drop your code and re-implement any of the code pieces. So you may want to migrate data, but you want to pick just certain code objects to bring forward. And the reason that this is a thing to consider is AX 2012 and 365 have very similar database schemas. You can use things, and you can use things like DIXF, OData, and custom imports to get there. So you could use a hybrid approach. Now for 2009, these are also common sense conclusions where for 2009 Service Pack 1, you can obviously re-implement to get to 365, and that'll be your first path. Second path would be, when I get this laser, your second path would be if you want to migrate. But that would be as if you use your migration tools. And then your third path, which is an interesting path, is if you wanted to have all of your code and stuff, you could go upgrade to 2012 R3, and then you can upgrade again. So we call this sort of a double upgrade. So I want to talk about the second path, and I'm going to go back to the screen right here. This second path right here. This is the officially recommended path from Microsoft. And what it's recommended for is any level of customization. What it does is it uses the specialized Microsoft toolset. It brings forward select data only, and I'll provide details of what select data that brings forward on a further slide. For the third path, this is the double upgrade. And the reason you might want to do the double upgrade is if you had low customizations and you decided that your data migration is more painful than a code upgrade, moving all of your data and your legacy, your historical data and open transactions, etc. Or if you have some sort of other unique business reasons for doing it. What it does is it potentially requires double testing. And the reason that you might think double testing is if you upgrade your data from AX 2009 to 2012, you may want to test to validate that data, or you could just do your final validation in 365. But you can imagine that upgrade scripts might not be perfect, and running everything through two sets of data upgrade scripts could have some unpredictable behavior. So the double upgrade, it would be considered higher risk, but it can be more complete with what you get. And then your first implementation, or your first path one is re-implement, and you'd want to do this when other paths don't work or other business reasons requirements, such as potentially drastically changing the way you do business. For 4.0, you've got some similar paths, but they are different. You can go, obviously, re-implement. This is always an option. Your path 2, what you can do is you can upgrade to 2009, and then you can migrate to use the migration utilities to get to 365. And then path 3, you can do a double upgrade. You can go from 4.0 to 2012 R3, and then upgrade again. This second path here, though, is an interesting path that I want to discuss more in detail, where you upgrade to 2009, and then you use the migration utilities. So I'm going to talk about path 3 right here, the double upgrade. Some reasons for choosing this is if maybe you have low customizations, data migration, again, it may be more painful than a code upgrade, and then other unique business reasons. And again, it'll potentially require the double testing, higher risk, but it can be more complete. The path 2, this is the one that I find most interesting if you're on 4.0, is upgrading and then migrating. So some of the reasons you may choose this method is if the effort to go to 2009 versus 2012 is lower, the ability to use the 2009, what it does is it provides you the ability to use the AX 2009 data migration tools and over your CSV, Excel, etc. Maybe if you have lower medium customizations. And then if you're concerned about data, but not all of your customizations, it would potentially also require some additional testing, but you could consider it a hack to more easily move your data by upgrading just your schema only. So Microsoft may bring the migration utilities that exist in 2009 to 4.0, but it's not promised yet as far as I'm aware. The reason I know this is because when I went and attended their workshop and I spoke with the engineers who were developing it, and I asked them, are you going to do it for 4.0? And they said, I don't know yet, maybe. It's kind of where they left it. So one thing you can think about this path is you could really just smash through a 4.0 to 2009 upgrade purely for the purpose of getting your data and schema in 2009. So you you just abandon your classes and all your other your forms and objects like that and just focus on getting your data to 2009. And then you could use those canned Microsoft migration tools. And you don't need to concern yourself with testing forms or reports or anything, because really the point of doing that would be purely for data moves and data migrations. And also a 4.0 to 2009 upgrade isn't tremendously difficult from that perspective, whereas a 4.0 to 2012 R3 up could be much more complex because you have models and things like that in 2012. And then per 4.0, your path one is obviously reimplement. One reason you could do this is when other options don't work. Another thing is 4.0 and even 2009 are very old systems. So carrying and massaging forward potentially 10 years of data may be undesirable or overly difficult. And often your business could have fundamentally changed the way they operate in the past 10 plus years. And it may be just time to rethink how you're using your ERP. So from 2009, remember when I said I'd come back to that slide? When you migrate from it, it brings forward only select data. And so what that means is configurations and setups of your ledger, customer groups, and vendor groups, your master data, such as customers, vendors, projects, and accounts, balances from ledger, stock, and prices, any open documents like pending note, invoices, purchase orders, sales orders, etc. System configuration, such as number sequence, user groups, users, and security, and then anything represented as an entity. And what an entity is it allows communication, but agnostic of environment. So you essentially can create, an object that describes your data. So it's a normalized view of data. So with 2009, when you're migrating, there are various revisions floating around of the 2009 tools, but the way it works is you install an AX 2009 KB, and then you install, and I'm talking just purely how it works. So you install your DIXF components that are for your AX 2009, in your AX 2009 environment, your source. You install some other miscellaneous prerequisites. What you do is you create a SQL account, not like or an SA. You can use your SA account or just create one. You load an Excel or CSV of some default data from Microsoft. And then in your 2009 source environment, you set up your Dynamics 365 Azure connection information. And then once that's done, your source environment is all set up in order to communicate. And then you go to your target 365 environment where you import a package and compile and sync. And that's lets the 2009 environment communicate to the 365 environment. And you must understand a lot of this stuff is somewhat subject to change, and some of the screenshots have changed since Microsoft has finally released this out of private preview. But I've also provided a bunch of feedback, so there may be additional changes as the tools come by the time you get to see them. And there's also some other miscellaneous details that I won't be covering, but they're minor, such as sequencing, related table discovery, field mappings, in the interest of time, but they're not that difficult to figure out. And from migrating to 2009, so I want to give you some thoughts on these upgrading screens. So it's an X++ based framework and utility at its core. So when you go to your 2009 source environment and install it, you end up with a whole bunch of X++ code. And what it does is it communicates with the DIXF components. It's very useful, but it's not rocket science, with what it's doing, which is good. So you can go in and look at the code and make changes to it if you need to. If you decide that you want to add a button to make your data migration simpler, you can add a button and customize the tool set. So these simple customizations, it can solve your unique business needs for specific problems that the tool's not designed out of the box for. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what it produces are data packages to load or automatically load in your 365 environment. It's an iterative process too. So and that's how many upgrades are, where you'll upgrade and push data out, and you'll go and look and see that you didn't map a certain field correctly, or an EDT or an enum didn't line up and the data is not coming through. It can be done with deltas as needed. And the way it uses that is it uses the modified date time and rec version on the records, and it enables this in AOT on that tables in the user layer. So when you go to the tool and you turn that on and you choose certain tables, it's going to be adding user layer codes. Another thing is the documentation currently isn't there, but what is there is not robust. So often simply looking at the source code of that migration utility is the quickest way to figure out what's going on. And that can be because even the labels and descriptions aren't super detailed. So here's a screenshot. I just wanted to show what it looks like from 2009. So these forms and setups, they're built by engineers, and that's an important thing to understand, and they're not by users, so they're confusing. Some example is this generate maps right here. This really should be called configuration or setup. And this create migration group, for example, it would probably be better to be named migration group, because you can think of it as your sales table form, where if you open it, you can create sales orders or you can view sales orders. If they called your sales table form create sales order, it might confuse you. And here's just your main pane. So now here's some more screenshots. So these are your main setup screens. So you see it's called DMT parameters. Well, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. That's this one right here, generate maps. So if you know that it's built by engineers and not users, and you know that you might be a little confused, it makes it easier going into it. So these forms and setups, I would think they should be called, it should be split into two forms, parameters and initialization, because there's certain buttons like this generate maps, where the way I look at it is the engineers may have said, okay, we need a button to do something. All right, just throw it on the parameters form. You can see here on this tab, this is where you would input your Dynamics 365 for Operations configuration data, where you have your service URL, your tenant URL, you have to create an app ID, and then you put your username and password. What this does is when you go and connect and you generate your maps, it'll reach out to 365 and download all of the entities that are in 365 so that your 2009 source environment knows where it can push data. And it also allows, if you want, to push the data package directly into 365. So it can be one way or two way. And then here's some other configurations you set up. This default configuration, this is an Excel or CSV. Microsoft has released it a couple ways of a bunch of the defaults that they provide. So they provide some default queries and things that you'll see a little bit later. You create a path where you want to export DIXF service host. This is where your DIXF setup is set up. And then if you put your SQL user and password in here. And then system parameters has almost nothing on it. It's just a couple checkboxes. But there's your parameters form. So here is your legal entities and your migration company. What you'll do here is you mark your companies that you want for migration. It provides contextual data to give you some information. So this is just a row count of all the tables that it's looking at in the system. And then if you click to look into the details, you can see the different tables and the row counts. This is almost purely for informational purposes, so you can kind of get an idea of what you're migrating. And then this is where you also would migrate what other legal entities you want. And it's just useful for kind of a bellwether of what you're looking at. So migrating from 2009, your data conversions, the way they work is it's defined at an EDT level for this data conversions form. So you have country, currency, unit, etc. And this would be on the source side. So what you can do is you can map different source values to target values. Generally, they're going to be the same. But if you have, say, some EDT level or EDT that's going to a different one, you can map these conversions here. It's just a rudimentary method to take an EDT. And whenever we come across the specified source value for where that EDT is found, they convert it to the target value. You can see this would be a problem, though, if you had an inexperienced developer that didn't use the correct EDT or extend the correct EDT in their development of a customization. Is it a major problem, though? Probably not, because once issues are identified, fixing the code and then in some cases the data in the source system can resolve it for your next iteration. Here's another screen, your financial dimension setup. This is where you simply map your source to your target, and then it uses separator and then for the separator that it uses, it's from that original parameter setup form on that other tab. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Here's your inventory dimensions setup form, and currently I don't believe you can change these, but in the future you may be able to. This is where you configure your chart of account, and here's just the different screens. Here's your first form, or here's the form with the different tabs, the same form, where you have your chart of accounts. Here's where you set up your legal entities, and you can include them to the chart of accounts. And here's where you set up your opening balance setup forms. And this is also, all this data is going to be recorded too, so you'll be able to look back at this if you want to see these screens. I just think it's important to sometimes look at the screen and kind of consume it. Here's where you configure your ledger. It's pretty simple. You set up your ledger, and then here's another 4 fields you put in on this next tab. And then here's this is the core sort of migration cockpit. So when you load that defaults from the Excel, in that Excel, it contains things like this highlighted queries right here. And the query tick box right here, this is a minor change that I actually requested Microsoft added. So the reason is if you have all these data, sometimes you have a query and sometimes you don't. So just knowing if you have a query would be a nice checkbox. If Microsoft doesn't add it, you could modify this form and add that and do that simply. Since this version, this is actually from a pre-release version, these screens, Microsoft did actually add the feature that I wanted, but instead of a checkbox, they have one checkbox at the top that says only show rows with queries. So it's the same thing. But you can see how when I said earlier, it brings over select data, such as open sales orders. Well, you can see right here, this is how it does that. It has a standard, and all the SQL is standard ANSI SQL, by the way, but it just has the standard ANSI SQL where it says select the sales orders where sales status is 1, and that's why it brings over open. So if you modify this, you bring over other orders, but you have to consider those complexities that it does. So if you want, you could modify it in any ones, but you have to consider those underlying tables. So here is from upgrading from 2012, that's what I want to talk about now. This is an infographic from Microsoft. They essentially break it down into 2 phases, your evaluation phase and your implementation phase. Your evaluation would be where you sign up for lifecycle services. You can take your 2009 code base, dump it into LCS, run the upgrade analysis, and it can provide an estimate for what the preparation work would be. This estimate is just a bellwether, and it's not accurate. If you did this and then you went to say a partner is going to do an upgrade and say, hey, it says it's supposed to take 2 hours for the whole thing, it's not entirely accurate. But what it does is it gives you some good information. So it gives you some Excels and of different customizations. It can give you all your different models, and it just provides a decent analysis to think about. Then you would deploy, say, a demo environment, and if you wanted to, you could run the code upgrade tile, and you can kind of look at it and define gaps that are missing and create your project plan. Then you get to your implementation phase, where you execute and validate. So your execute is where you perform your 2012 upgrade tasks, and I'll show you those tasks in a later slide. You then perform your code upgrade and then develop any new code that you may need to match new gaps or functionality changes. Then you'll do your validation, where you do your data upgrade in your dev environment and upgrade validation. Then you do your cutover testing, create your cutover plan, and do your data upgrade in a sandbox environment, and eventually you'll have functional testing. And if it passes, you kind of loop around, and eventually you get to the point where you have a cutover plan and your testing passes. You do your go live checklist and go live. So is there a Dynamics 365 upgrade guide? Previous versions of Dynamics upgrade guides were mainly static, and you would get a giant PDF of detailed steps. And the PDF was critical that you read through every line and step, because there could be one little nugget of information that said, do this thing, and if you don't do that, nothing works. So the current version, though, for 365, here's the root page of where you can go for the upgrade. It's still changing, so some screenshots instructions on their website don't line up with provided objects. And then also instructions are spread across multiple pages. They're broken into smaller subtopics. And some web pages, you can only use part of the instructions, where you'll get a web page where the top section applies to something else in the bottom section. So Dynamics 365 upgrade, if you're going from 2012 to 365, can be a little bit of the Wild Wild West as they tighten up their documentation, but it's getting more streamlined and better. There's also small important caveats for different scenarios for 365 as well, but it's one of those things where it's an iterative process. I wanted to discuss the high-level steps, where you analyze, perform, prepare, restore, and run. So I'm going to gloss over the details a little bit, but what I'm going to talk about in these upcoming slides is what you're actually going to do and try to cut out the fat. So I'm going to break each of these topics down in further slides. So if you're ready to upgrade in 6 months, will this process change? Probably not a whole lot, but Microsoft is trying to trim these steps and increase automation. Ideally, what they want is for you to take your 2009 code base and database and upload them into LCS and hit go, and it'll upgrade for you. They are not there yet, but that's their goal. And when they say that's their goal, they'll also upgrade for you, but you'll still have to modify and refactor all your code. There's no way they're going to be able to do that. So in the analyze step, that's where you analyze and will convert your code to the LCS. And what that does is that converts it to Dynamics 365 XML files. That's how the code is stored in 365 as XML files. You perform your code upgrade in that 365 target environment, where you refactor, remove, and do release update scripts. And then you prepare, then that's where you'll install hotfix. You install your hotfix in your 2012 environment, you perform a checklist to prepare your 2012. Then you do a restore, where you restore your transaction database in 365 environment. It's parallel to your 365 database. And then if you have Azure SQL or local VMs, they have slightly different methods, but similar concepts, where you would use SQL backpack or SQL package backpack, some one-time SQL scripts. And then after you restore that database, you'll run the data upgrade deployable packages. So they have a major version data upgrade package and a major version data upgrade retail package. You have to run both of them even if you're not using retail. So I want to talk about the analyze step. What this does is you link your LCS project to VSTS. This is an optional step, but it's recommended. You can, and then what you do in 2012 is you export your AX 2012 model store from your current code base, zip it up in a zip file, and then you upload it to LCS and hit go. And you can see here, this is an LCS screen where you upload it and hit go. It's that simple. What VSTS is, if I haven't explained it, it's Visual Studio Team Services, formerly known as Visual Studio Online. And what it is TFS in the cloud. So TFS is Team Foundation Server. So all it is a version control system. And you could either have TFS, which is an on-prem one, or you use VSTS in the cloud. VSTS is the direction Microsoft's going, and it's excellent. So analyze, I want to continue. So what does this do? It converts those files, your code, to those 365 files I was talking about, and then it also checks it into VSTS as a baseline. And then what it does is it creates your VSTS work items that correspond with the code, where your work items would be a task list of things to do to upgrade. And then also at the same time, it estimates the upgrade effort to lift code and provides reports. So here's a screenshot of what you'd see if you did an upgrade in VSTS. You'll see these different objects, migrate these objects, migrate these objects, and you can kind of look at it as sort of to-do list. It's not perfect, but it's a good guide. And then you can see there's certain tags that will automatically apply at the end of it. So in the analyze step, it breaks it down in your VSTS. You have different sections. You have your metadata, which is considered your code. And then you got projects, and it'll create 3 different projects. Your code merge solution, which is a project per model of your elements needing resolved. And these are your projects down here. Your unparsable solution, this is usually objects could not be successfully converted to XML. This is rare, but there are some objects, such as if you have ActiveX controls or something like that loaded in your environment, and it may not be able to convert those. Usually it's empty. And then your upgrade solution, this is a project per model of the upgraded objects. So you can see your metadata section right here is this is what it creates, is all of your code, and then your projects are the different groupings of the code. So when you do the analyze, how useful are those reports? Again, it's a great bellwether, but not that accurate. How accurate are the estimates? And so this does not consider any refactoring efforts, which could be huge and is not captured. If it says one report wasn't able to be upgraded, well, that report could need to be totally rewritten, and that could be a week of effort. This was Quacks, our ISV solution, when we took it from 2012 to 365, to give you an idea. And it says something, it says 17 hours, and it took more like weeks. And maybe potentially maybe a month and change. So to think that it says 17 hours and it really took a month and change, and that's of me doing it without needing any approvals, or I don't need to go back and forth or testing. It was just cruising through it. So, but what does this help provide? This can help provide kind of a look into your objects, and you can see, okay, which ones are not significant, which ones are, what's the covering percentages. So it's just a good bellwether. And now I want to talk about the refactor section. Why would you need a refactor? Well, certain depreciated features that may have been previously in use are no longer available in 365, so you may need to provide a new solution. Certain methods of customizing your code may no longer be supported, because it requires a new style of development. Method overloading using class state, deposable context, and chain of command are some of the styles of development that you have to use. You have to convert your code to the extensibility model. So refactoring. When I want to talk about depreciated features, so I want to give some technical examples. Enterprise Portal is depreciated. ActiveX controls and managed host controls, they're no longer used. AAF, AXD, and AXBC integrations are out. They're replaced by the data import-export framework. Direct database access to SQL is going to be prevented, and it's attempted to be removed. So you won't be able to just directly access SQL. Microsoft wants to do that so they can provide software as a service. Some depreciated functional examples: virtual company accounts are gone. The reason that virtual companies are gone is because it's difficult to set up. It proved to be often cause problems. So data for your origin company, for example, would be lost. And these virtual company accounts are often used for table sharing. Data partitions, they were used originally for data isolation, and now they will be done through multiple databases or instances, so those are gone. Role centers is gone. And then also for the ActiveX and managed host controls, these have been removed because the extensible control framework now supports these new controls based on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then your role centers is replaced by workspaces. If you want, you can see a more complete list here. These are just some of the examples I sort of cherry picked I thought were interesting. So now I want to talk about the code upgrade, the remove process. So you want to look at this as an opportunity to tidy up your code base when you do an upgrade. You want to remove unwanted customizations and ISVs. You want to remove customizations replaced by new functionality. You may have developed something that now exists by Microsoft, and you really want to remove the junk because you want to avoid unnecessary carry forward of data and code. So for the code upgrade, the release update scripts. So what these do are that you can create custom upgrade tasks to do desired data transformations. So in 2012 and 365, the underlying framework for the data upgrade is largely the same as in AX 2012. It's a batch job framework that runs these release update star classes. And you create those so that you can upgrade any custom data that you need to bring forward. So now I'm going to talk about the prepare environment step. So when you do the prepare environment, you install this KB, and it comes in right here in your 2012 environment, and you go through this checklist. So what does this checklist do? You validate your baseline version. What this does is it makes sure your AX version is supported based on hard-coded values. It's very simple. It just says, is this 2012 R2? Is it 2012 R3? If it's not, then we can't handle it. You prepare your model metadata. What does this do? What it does is it directly creates a model element SQL table inside your AX transaction database, and then it inserts everything from your model store model element table into it. So it basically bundles things from your model store database into your transaction database so that it can do mapping later on, because in 365 your model store database is gone. So when you do an upgrade, it needs to use a little bit of model store data in that environment. So what's significant about this is if you do a database sync, after you start this prepare, you're going to probably drop that table, and that'll screw everything up. So some people may start going through this checklist, and then they may just decide to compile and sync their environment for good measure for some reason. Well, you're gonna screw this up, and they don't make that clear, but you would drop an important table and have problems later on. This prepare security role metadata, what does this do? So when you install this KB, it also installs a staging table called security role upgrade. And what it does is it simply takes two fields, AOT name and rec ID, from your security role table, and then it inserts those into this new security role upgrade table. This is simply to map the roles, because security in AX in 2012 is unique in that security spans both your model store and your transaction database. So this does a preparation so that it doesn't lose any of those things. Set up your user mappings. What does this do? This opens a new form, user info upgrade. And what it is, it's a really simple form, and I'll show you in a minute. And you can import from files like an Excel or CSV, and all it is it's mapping your username to your Azure email. It's that simple. Archiving your retail salt data. This is used to migrate the registry key that retail salt utility uses. It's used for some deployments where the customer wants to inject a specific random value into the hash that's used to authenticate channel users. If you're not really using retail, you click it and it's done. And then in an upgrade, your model database is left behind. So the data contained in there needs to be bundled into the business data for any data that's necessary. And if you look at this URL, you can see what this prepare. You can see more detail on this prepare. But a lot of the detail I just provided to you is from examining the code and telling you exactly what it does. And then I want to give you a quick screenshot of the elements that are introduced, because if you're looking at an upgrade, you might wonder, okay, what's this KB going to do? Is it going to be a lot of effort to merge? And you can see almost pretty much everything here standalone. It does overlap with the system administration, but it's pretty much creating purely new objects. Installing the KB should be pretty simple. And then here's that user info mapping table that I was talking about. I'll go back one slide to show you this setup user mapping right here. What this is you just put your name and you map it to your Azure email address because you log in with your Azure Active Directory. It's that simple. So for 2012, when you do the restore session, what is that? You basically restore your prepared AX database in your 365 environment. So when you finish when you finish preparing your database, you just restore it in parallel next to your 365 environment. Then what do? You run the data upgrade packages. And then here's this URL where you can see more information about it. The way these work is still changing. And an example is where it interacts with the registry to store and retrieve data. And previously in 2012, the checklist, if you went through the checklist, it felt more like confined to AX and the database. While this, so like if you ran the 2012 checklist, is all entirely in AX, but while this interacts more with your environment. So it's a command line utility right now. It's not a friendly upgrade cockpit. They're looking to put it in LCS to make a friendly upgrade user interface so that you're not using the command line. What it does is it runs a combination of PowerShell code and utilities. So there's custom executables and DLLs that they're running, mostly a PowerShell framework. And then it also includes manual steps. So one of the steps would be stop and perform a database backup. And then you perform the database backup and you hit say, I did that. And what it can do is it can feel like a black box where you're looking at a command prompt and you say, go do something, and you don't know what it's doing and if it works. Often it'll require digging into the various XMLs and PowerShell scripts to understand what's happening in order to resolve issues. I've personally gone as far to decompile certain assemblies. And you can see over here on the right, this is sort of a screenshot of it. And what it does is it does interact with more than just the database. And so in Microsoft, again, it's on their roadmap for an automated upgrade. So I wanted to show when I run this upgrades, the upgrade cockpit, some of the steps that complete. So you can see right here, here's your step 3. It says, please back up your database now. It's a manual step. So I went and did this. And so this is actually, when you do this, step 3, if you follow the instructions, it's actually where you swap the databases. So you do a backup, but you take your 365 environment and your parallel database and you just rename them and swap them. And then there's certain times where you have things like this, where it's going and it says compressing and it just says everything is okay. And it sits there for a long time. So it's hung and you're staring at everything okay. It's thinking, okay, is it okay or is it hung? And so at this step, what it's actually doing is compressing all the objects and archiving them in a backup somewhere in one of the deeper folders. It's not clearly documented anywhere, but if you look in the log text and examine it, you can see what it's doing. But you can think of it as a black box where you're staring at, is everything okay, wondering, is it okay? There's a runbook working folder where a lot of this stuff is stored, and they don't document that clearly, but you can find it, and that's where all these files and compressions and backup are doing. So I want to talk about some example problems we may run across. So this major version data upgrade, well, it's provided in certain environments, so you have to download the updated version of it. So in many of the different downloads you'll get, they're different versions. So they're not all the same. So the LCS issue search is one that you can use to identify it. So when you connect your environment to LCS, it's what identifies it. So you have your LCS environment tile and you have your LCS issue search. Your environment tile is actually aware of your environment. It knows if you're on R2, R3, if you're on 365. Your issue search is not aware. Here you can see some of another example. So AOS service on machine, it says stop this. When I was running this step, I had left, there's a batch service that's running on the machine. So I had to stop it. And then this one also here, it says the version's not supported in this package, please downgrade. This was just I had the wrong version downloaded. So here's another example problem. Here was a SQL sync issue where it presents itself. So as you go through and move it, I got a SQL sync issue. And if you can't see, it says the invalid object name, company info view, and then the error says create QUA address entity view. So what this was our ISV solution that we were upgrading has a view in it, and a view is just a kind of a picture into SQL. It's a way of looking at data. It's almost like a query, and this doesn't make any sense because a view isn't the data. It's just a view of the data. So what this is just a bug, and I've reported it, and they probably fixed it now. But the way I fixed it was I just dropped the view because the view doesn't drop any data. I just dropped it and it got recreated. Any other SQL issues you might have will present themselves here, such as new unique indexes that might be introduced by Microsoft. It would present bad data. So your best approach is usually to resolve the data in the source system And you can use your consistency check in your source system to help resolve that. So the reason that you may want to do that is if you have maybe some legacy data, or you deleted a company somehow, or you deleted a whole bunch of data and had some orphaned data. Well, these new unique indexes they may present will identify that bad data. So in 2012 upgrade, where is the pain? The pain is primarily in your code refactoring and development. So you have to have new technologies to learn. You have to build new integrations because certain things like picking up CSVs from folders won't really work. You have new reports and dashboards to potentially build, and then a lot of new concepts to find or to understand. And it can be far slower process in some areas and faster in others, and the environments are much more restrictive. So why not data is the pain? Well, the D365 database actually started from the AX 2012 database, so it's a very similar schema. So there's a lot lower effort to transform the data. From 2009 to 2012, they did a very complex database overhaul, and they denormalized the database. Well, 2012 and 365, they have pretty much the same database. That's why you really can keep your data. So what can you do now? You can develop with an extensibility model in mind. So what that means is think pre and post events. So you want to do something before Microsoft's code or do something after Microsoft's code. You want to isolate your code from the base code as much as possible. So if you have a whole bunch of code and say the sales form letter run method, maybe take that code and move it into methods and just call those methods. So then that way, when you do an upgrade, you're really upgrading one small method instead of a huge block of code. You want to follow best practices and avoid shortcuts, because your bad habits really will catch up to you. It's almost like a balloon payment on a high interest loan. You eventually you're gonna have to pay for it, and that's where your bad habits will hurt you. You want to use a version control system. So you want to learn how it works: check-ins, change sets, branches, etc. You want to learn the methodology and understand the various work items and implement a strategy for it. The reason you want to use a version control system is because one major reason is it much more controls what you're doing in your environment, gives you better visibility, lets you understand when and why code changes are there. A lot of times you'll have one developer come in and perform a task for someone, and then that developer leaves, and then that person who had the task performance will leave. So then you end up with new functional people and technical people staring at code that they have no idea why it's there. You want to also learn and use lifecycle services, which is LCS, as it will be mandatory. What it is it provides a collaborative workspace. It's for telemetry, monitoring, and a diagnostics portal. You can do issue search and hotfix specifically related to your environment. You do your package deployment, and it's also your support portal. You can think of it as sort of the brains and the kind of the glue that ties everything together. What else can you do? You can familiarize yourself with Visual Studio. It's the new development environment replacing MorphX. You'll do debugging, compiling, etc. there. Visual Studio itself isn't new, of course, but for the AX, it's the new environment. Integrations. You can use your data import export framework as AIF is depreciated. You want to understand what data entities are and how they work, as this concept extends beyond DIXF to the common data services and other technologies. You may want to learn OData. In 2012, it actually has OData, but it's got some limitations. But OData is a method of getting data in and out of 365. And then also you want to embrace the cloud where you can. So who wants to host an email server internally, where if the power goes out, everyone's email's down? So the cloud is coming, and take things where you can. And so with that, it wraps up. I wanted to, if anyone has any questions, you can contact Amir or I, or you also can take questions now if there's any in the chat.